Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today with a message of great power and divine truth. There are moments in life when we are weighed down by burdens, shackled by fear, and caught in the storm of our own struggles. We try to carry it all, to fix it all, but in doing so, we lose our peace, our direction, and our strength. But hear me now, there is a solution. The key to freedom, the key to peace, the key to victory, give it to God. You see, the creator of the universe, the one who commands the winds and the seas, has already made a way for you. He has not left you alone in your trials. The Bible says, "Cast your cares upon the Lord, and He will sustain you." Give it to God, your worries, your fears, your pain, your uncertainties, and watch as the miraculous begins to unfold. We often live our lives with the illusion that we have control over everything that happens to us. We plan our days, we manage our time, and we strategize for the future, believing that if we just hold on tight and control the outcomes, everything will work out. But the truth is, there are forces beyond our comprehension, forces that we cannot control. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs. Situations arise that we never saw coming, and problems appear that seem insurmountable. In these moments, we realize that the control we thought we had is often just an illusion. When we carry the weight of control, we become burdened by stress, anxiety, and fear. We become overwhelmed trying to fix everything ourselves, trying to make things work the way we envision them. Yet the more we struggle to hold on to control, the more we realize how powerless we really are. The truth is, there are situations in life that we simply cannot manage on our own. We need to release our grip on the idea that we can control every outcome, every situation, and every person in our lives. We need to understand that not everything is in our hands, and that's okay. This is where faith comes in. This is where we have to trust that there is a higher power, God, who is ultimately in control. When we choose to let go of control, we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. We don't need to have it all figured out. We don't need to carry the burden of trying to make everything happen according to our plan. Instead, we allow God to take the reins. This doesn't mean that we stop making decisions or that we don't take responsibility for our actions, but it means we stop trying to force things to happen on our own strength and ability. It means we release the pressure to control the outcome and trust that God's plan is far greater than our own. Letting go of control isn't easy. It requires a shift in mindset and a surrender of our will. We may feel uncomfortable, unsure, or even fearful of what might happen if we step back and let God take charge. The world teaches us to be self-reliant, to trust in our own abilities, and to control everything around us. But God calls us to do something different. He calls us to trust in His wisdom, His timing, and His provision. When we release control, we are allowing God to step into our lives in a powerful way, working in ways that we may not even understand at the time. In moments of uncertainty, we must remind ourselves that God is not distant or disconnected from our struggles. He is present in every situation, guiding us, comforting us, and providing for us. When we try to control everything ourselves, we limit the power of God to work in our lives. But when we let go and trust in Him, we open ourselves to the fullness of His grace and provision. This is where miracles happen, when we stop fighting for control and let God lead us. Letting go of control also means trusting in God's timing. Often we try to make things happen on our timeline, but God's timing is always perfect. What may seem like a delay or an obstacle could very well be God's way of preparing us for something greater. By releasing control, we allow God to work behind the scenes, orchestrating events, aligning opportunities, and preparing us for what's ahead. His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. When we surrender control, we acknowledge that His plan is far superior to anything we could ever come up with. Letting go of control doesn't mean that we won't face challenges. It doesn't mean that life will suddenly become easy. In fact, there may be times when it feels even harder because we're no longer trying to manage everything ourselves. But it does mean that we are no longer carrying the weight of those challenges alone. It means we are trusting that God is with us, guiding us through the storms of life, and that He will never leave us or forsake us. In letting go of control, we are choosing peace. We are choosing to trust in God's plan, His provision, and His ability to work all things together for our good. We are choosing to stop striving, stop worrying, and stop fighting for control. Instead, we are surrendering to the one who holds the universe in His hands, knowing that in His perfect love, He will lead us where we need to go. Letting go of control is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful act of faith. It is the moment we say, "God, I trust You with my life." I trust you with my future. I trust you with the things I cannot change. And when we do this, we open the door for God to do what only He can do. Trusting in God's timing is one of the most difficult aspects of faith. It challenges our understanding, our patience, and our sense of control. We live in a world that encourages instant gratification where everything is expected to happen on our timeline. We are conditioned to want things now, to have answers immediately, solutions at our fingertips, and success within reach at all times. But God's timing does not operate according to our schedule. His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't make sense to us. And that's where the challenge lies, in surrendering our timing to His and trusting that He knows what's best for us. The reality is we often don't know what's best for us. We think we do, and we have our plans and our desires. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees the bigger picture. He knows the path that we are meant to take, the lessons we need to learn, and the growth that is required in our lives. His timing isn't arbitrary or capricious. It's intentional and purposeful. What may seem like a delay or a setback in our lives might actually be God's way of protecting us, preparing us, or positioning us for something greater. And that requires us to trust that His way is the best way, even when it feels difficult or frustrating. There are times when we are faced with situations where we desperately want a change, a breakthrough, or a solution. We pray, and yet nothing seems to happen. We may feel like God is silent, like He's forgotten about us, or like He's simply not listening. But God's silence does not mean He is absent. In fact, His silence is often a sign that He is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot see or understand. Just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean that God isn't moving. His timing is not dependent on our urgency or our expectations. He works in His time, and His time is always the right time. It is in those moments of waiting, when we feel the most uncertain, that our faith is tested. Waiting forces us to confront our fears, our insecurities, and our doubts. We may question why things are taking longer than we thought, why the doors haven't opened, or why we haven't received the answer we've been seeking. But waiting is not wasted time. In fact, waiting can be one of the most transformative parts of our journey. It is in the waiting that we learn patience, trust, and dependence on God. It is in the waiting that we are shaped and refined, prepared for the blessings that are on their way. Trusting in God's timing means releasing our own sense of urgency and surrendering to His will. It means letting go of the need to control the situation and instead relying on His perfect plan. We may never fully understand why things happen the way they do, but that doesn't change the fact that God is in control. His timing is never too early or too late. It's always just right. When we choose to trust His timing, we let go of the anxiety, frustration, and fear that come with trying to force things to happen on our own. There is a passage in Ecclesiastes that reminds us of the beauty and perfection of God's timing. It says, "To everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven." This verse encapsulates the truth that God has a specific time for everything in our lives. There is a time to sow, a time to reap, a time to be still, and a time to act. The challenge is recognizing when it's our time to move and when it's our time to wait. Learning to discern God's timing is an essential part of growing in faith and understanding His will for our lives. One of the most powerful ways we can learn to trust God's timing is by looking back at the moments in our lives when things unfolded at just the right time. When we reflect on past experiences, we can often see how God orchestrated events, opened doors, and placed people in our lives at the perfect moment. There are times when we may not have understood it at the time, but looking back, we can see how everything came together in God's perfect way. This is the essence of trusting in His timing, knowing that even when we don't understand it, God is still working. He is always ahead of us, always preparing the way, and always moving in our favor. Trusting in God's timing also requires us to trust in His sovereignty. We must believe that He is in control even when the circumstances of our lives appear chaotic or out of our hands. God's timing is not always in line with our desires or expectations, but it is always in line with His purpose for us. And His purpose is always good. We may not always see it, but we can trust that He is working all things together for our good, just as the Bible promises. When we choose to trust in God's timing, we are choosing to surrender our fears, our doubts, and our need for control. We are choosing to believe that He knows what's best for us, even when it doesn't align with our understanding. This kind of trust requires patience, faith, and a willingness to submit to God's plan. It means trusting that in His perfect timing, He will do what is best for us and bring about His purpose in our lives. Surrendering your worries to God can often feel like one of the hardest things to do. We live in a world where anxiety and stress are constant companions, and it's easy to get consumed by the weight of our concerns. Whether it's our health, our relationships, our finances, or the future, there's always something that can trigger worry in our hearts and minds. But the Bible tells us that we do not have to carry these burdens alone. We are invited, no, we are commanded to cast our worries upon God because He cares for us. The act of surrendering our worries to God is not just a suggestion, it is a path to freedom, peace, and trust in His provision. When we choose to surrender our worries, we are acknowledging that we do not have the power to control everything. The more we try to control the outcome of situations, the more we find ourselves overwhelmed. Worry often leads us to believe that we must have everything figured out, that we must solve every problem ourselves. But the truth is, we were never meant to carry that kind of weight. God never intended for us to bear the full responsibility of life's difficulties. He invites us to cast all our cares upon Him, trusting that He is capable and willing to carry the burden for us. There are many moments in life when worry can begin to consume us. It might start as a small thought, a fleeting concern, but over time, if left unchecked, it can grow into a heavy burden that takes up all our mental and emotional energy. We find ourselves replaying scenarios in our minds, imagining worst-case situations and stressing over things we cannot change. The truth is, most of what we worry about is beyond our control. Worrying about the future, about what might happen, or about what others think of us only wastes energy and steals our peace. It's a trap that keeps us focused on problems instead of solutions and robs us of the joy of the present moment. The more we dwell on worry, the more we amplify the problem in our minds. But when we surrender those worries to God, we are choosing to release the grip that anxiety has on us. We are choosing to trust that He is in control, that He sees the bigger picture, and that He knows what is best for us. By surrendering our worries, we are saying, God, I don't have all the answers and I can't control everything, but I trust You with this situation. I trust You to handle it in Your way and in Your time. It's an act of faith that allows us to let go of the need to fix everything ourselves and instead place our trust in the One who is all-powerful and all-knowing. It's important to remember that surrendering our worries does not mean ignoring the challenges we face or being passive in our lives. It doesn't mean that we stop taking action or making decisions. It simply means that we are no longer carrying the burden of stress and fear on our own. It means that we are acknowledging that God is sovereign and that He can work in ways that we cannot even imagine. When we let go of our worries, we are allowing room for God to move in our lives. We are allowing Him to guide us, to give us wisdom, and to provide for us in ways that go beyond our understanding. Surrendering our worries is also a choice to trust in God's timing and provision. Often we worry because we feel uncertain about what the future holds. We fear the unknown, and we try to anticipate every possible outcome, often to our own detriment. But when we surrender our worries, we acknowledge that we don't have to know every detail of what's coming. We don't have to have the perfect plan. We simply need to trust that God, who holds our future in His hands, will provide exactly what we need when the time is right. He promises in His word that He will never leave us or forsake us, and that He will supply all our needs according to His riches in glory. When we truly believe this, we are able to let go of our worries and rest in His peace. The act of surrender also involves releasing control. So much of worry stems from the desire to control outcomes, people, and situations. We try to fix things, to force things into place, and we exhaust ourselves in the process. But God calls us to release that control and trust Him with the results. He doesn't ask us to do everything ourselves. He doesn't expect us to have it all figured out. Instead, He invites us to cast our cares upon Him, knowing that He is capable of handling all that we cannot. When we stop trying to control the uncontrollable, we free ourselves to experience the peace that comes from trusting in God's ability to handle everything. Surrendering our worries also allows us to focus on the present moment. How much of our time is spent worrying about what has already happened or what might happen in the future? The past cannot be changed and the future is unknown. But God has given us today and we can find His peace. When we surrender our worries, we stop allowing the past or the future to dominate our thoughts. We bring our focus back to the present, to the here and now, where God's grace is sufficient for each moment. The peace that comes from surrendering our worries is not fleeting or temporary. It is a deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing that we are in the hands of a loving and trustworthy God. It's a peace that surpasses understanding, one that allows us to stand firm in the face of trials and challenges, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. When we surrender our worries to God, we open ourselves up to the fullness of His peace and the assurance that He is in control. It's a peace that transforms our hearts, our minds, and our perspective on life. Believing in God's power is one of the foundational elements of the Christian faith. It is through belief in His omnipotence that we are able to find the strength to overcome the challenges that life throws at us. But belief in God's power goes beyond acknowledging that He is capable of great things. It's about trusting that His power is at work in our lives, even when we can't see the results immediately. It's about knowing that God's power is not limited to the past or the future, but is active in our present circumstances, shaping our lives and transforming our situations. To believe in God's power is to understand that nothing is too difficult for Him and nothing is beyond His reach. God's power is not just a distant force, it is a present and living reality. We read in Scripture about the mighty things God has done, parting the Red Sea, bringing the walls of Jericho down, healing the sick, raising the dead, and sending His Son to die and rise again for our salvation. These are incredible demonstrations of His power, but His power is not confined to the pages of history or the grand events of the Bible. His power is active today in our lives, in our prayers, and in our struggles. The God who parted the Red Sea is the same God who walks with us through every storm and who has the power to bring peace to our troubled hearts. The God who healed the sick is the same God who can heal our wounds, both physical and emotional. The God who raised Jesus from the dead is the same God who can bring new life to our dreams, our relationships, and our futures. When we believe in God's power, we are choosing to believe in the impossible. We are choosing to believe that what the world says cannot be done is not beyond God's ability. In the face of challenges, we often look at our limitations and the obstacles in front of us, and we begin to doubt. We think, how can I ever overcome this? Or this is too big for me. But when we believe in God's power, we understand that it is not about our own strength, wisdom, or resources. It is about surrendering to His greater strength. We are invited to bring our impossibilities to God and trust that He has the power to change things. Whether it's a financial situation, a relationship, an illness, or any other circumstance, God has the power to intervene and turn things around. Believing in God's power also means trusting in His ability to do what is best for us. Sometimes we may ask for things and we don't receive them right away, or perhaps we don't receive them at all. In these moments, it can be easy to doubt God's power or His goodness, but God's power is always working in our lives, even when we don't see it. His power isn't just about fixing problems in our lives, it's about working within us to transform our hearts, our minds, and our characters. God knows what we need even before we ask, and His power works in ways that are for our ultimate good, even if it doesn't always align with our desires. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. This means that God's power is not limited by what we think we need or what we can understand. He sees the bigger picture and works in ways that far surpass our understanding. To believe in God's power is to understand that His power is not limited by time, space, or circumstance. We may face difficulties that seem insurmountable, challenges that feel overwhelming, or seasons of life that seem impossible to navigate. But God's power is limitless. There is nothing too big or too small for Him. When we believe in His power, we are choosing to focus on the greatness of God rather than the size of our problems. Our faith grows as we remember who God is and what He has done. We can face each day with confidence, knowing that we are not alone, and that God's power is available to us to guide us through whatever we face. Another aspect of believing in God's power is the understanding that His power is transformative. It is not just a power that can fix problems, but a power that can change hearts and lives. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is the power that is at work within us, transforming us into the likeness of Christ. It's a power that can take brokenness and turn it into healing, despair into hope, fear into courage. When we believe in God's power, we understand that He is not just a distant observer. He is actively working in us and through us, renewing our minds and transforming our spirits. This kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it happens gradually as we yield ourselves to His power and allow Him to work within us. Believing in God's power also means believing in His ability to do the miraculous. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of God's miraculous power. He made the sun stand still for Joshua, caused fire to come down from heaven for Elijah, and healed the blind and the lame through Jesus. These miraculous acts are not just stories from the past, they are reminders that God is still capable of performing miracles today. When we face situations that seem hopeless or beyond repair, we can pray with confidence, knowing that God has the power to make a way where there seems to be no way. His power is not limited to our understanding or our expectations. He can do far beyond what we can imagine. To truly believe in God's power means to live in the assurance that He is able and willing to work in our lives. It is a belief that fuels our hope and strengthens our faith. When we trust in God's power, we are empowered to face life's challenges with courage and conviction, knowing that we do not face them alone. We know that the God who spoke the universe into existence is the same God who walks with us, and His power is more than enough to see us through every trial and every season of life. Faith in God's ability to provide is a cornerstone of the Christian life. In a world that often emphasizes self-reliance and independence, it can be difficult to fully trust in God's provision, especially when we are faced with challenges or uncertainties. We are constantly bombarded by messages telling us to work harder, to strive more, to do everything on our own. Yet God calls us to a different way of living a life of trust in His provision, knowing that He will supply our needs according to His riches and glory. To have faith in God's ability to provide is to rest in the knowledge that He is our ultimate source and that He will never leave us lacking. God's provision is not just about meeting our basic physical needs, although He certainly does that. It's about providing for us in every area of our lives, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically. We may find ourselves in moments of deep need where we are unsure how we will make it through, but in these moments, God shows Himself as our faithful provider. He is a God who cares about every aspect of our well-being. His provision is not limited to the material. It extends to our emotional and spiritual needs as well. Whether we are experiencing loneliness, fear, anxiety, or doubt, God is there to provide peace, comfort, and strength. His provision goes beyond what we think we need, meeting us in places where we didn't even realize we were lacking. When we have faith in God's ability to provide, we begin to look to Him as our source of all things. We stop relying on our own strength, our own resources, or our own understanding of the world. We start to understand that our provision is not dependent on our circumstances or the economy, but on the faithfulness of a God who is unchanging. His ability to provide doesn't fluctuate with the ups and downs of life. It's steady, constant, and reliable. When we place our faith in His ability to provide, we are acknowledging that He is in control and that He knows exactly what we need, even before we ask for it. The Bible is filled with promises of God's provision. One of the most well-known verses is Philippians 4:19, which says, "And my God will supply every need of yours according to His riches in glory in Christ Jesus." This verse is a powerful reminder that God is not a distant, uncaring deity, but a loving Father who delights in providing for His children. His provision is not based on our ability to earn or deserve it, but on His love and grace. When we trust in God's provision, we let go of the pressure to provide for ourselves in every area of life. We no longer have to carry the burden of constantly striving to meet our own needs. Instead, we can rest in the assurance that God sees us, knows our needs, and will provide for us in His perfect way. One of the keys to experiencing God's provision is learning to trust Him completely. Trusting in God's provision doesn't mean that we will never face challenges or times of lack, but it means that we can face those times with confidence, knowing that God is faithful. Trusting in His provision means surrendering our anxieties about the future and trusting that God will supply everything we need in His perfect timing. It means letting go of the need to control every aspect of our lives and allowing God to lead us into places of abundance and rest. Jesus spoke often about trusting in God's provision, especially in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 6:25-34, He tells His followers not to worry about what they will eat, drink, or wear? Because God knows what they need. Jesus emphasizes that if God takes care of the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, He will certainly take care of His children. This passage serves as a reminder that God is not unaware of our needs, and He is not indifferent to our struggles. He is actively involved in providing for us, and He promises that as we seek first His kingdom, everything we need will be added to us. When we have faith in God's provision, we also learn to be content with what we have. Contentment is an essential part of trusting in God's provision. It is easy to become discontent when we are focused on what we don't have or on what others seem to have. But contentment comes from recognizing that God has already given us everything we need for life and godliness. When we learn to trust in His provision, we can find peace in the present moment, knowing that God has supplied everything we need for today. Faith in God's ability to provide frees us from the constant desire for more and helps us to live with a sense of gratitude and joy for what we have. One of the most powerful demonstrations of God's provision can be seen in the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. When they were hungry and thirsty, God provided manna from heaven and water from a rock. Even when they grumbled and complained, God continued to provide for them, showing them that He was faithful to meet their needs. The Israelites' journey through the wilderness was a long and difficult one, but throughout it all, God showed His provision time and time again. This story serves as a reminder that even in the most challenging seasons of life, God is faithful to provide for us. When we trust in His provision, we are not just relying on our own abilities, but on a God who is always present and always faithful. Finally, faith in God's provision requires us to live with an open hand. When we trust in God to provide, we are also called to be generous with what He has given us. We are not to hoard or hold on to our blessings out of fear that we won't have enough, but rather to trust that as we give, God will continue to provide for us. In 2 Corinthians 9:6-8, Paul reminds us that God loves a cheerful giver and that He will provide for us in abundance, not so that we can hoard, but we can be a blessing to others. When we live with an open hand, trusting in God's provision, we become instruments of His generosity in the world. We not only experience His provision for ourselves, but also become channels through which others can experience His goodness. When we talk about giving our burdens to God, we are discussing the act of surrender. Surrender is not about weakness, but about recognizing that we are not in control of everything and acknowledging that God is greater than our struggles. It is about accepting that God knows what is best for us, even when we cannot understand it. We often try to control every aspect of our lives, our relationships, our finances, our health, believing that if we just try hard enough, we can fix things ourselves. However, giving our burdens to God means letting go of that control and trusting Him with everything, knowing that He is the one who is ultimately in charge. The Bible speaks clearly about the importance of surrendering our burdens to God. In 1 Peter 5:7, we are told to cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. This verse is not just a suggestion, it is a command to release the things that weigh us down and place them in the hands of our loving Father. It is a reminder that God cares deeply for us and He wants to carry our burdens so that we don't have to bear them alone. This act of surrender is not about giving up, but about letting go of the need to carry things that are too heavy for us to bear. When we choose to give our burdens to God, we open ourselves up to His peace and His strength, which are far greater than anything we can muster on our own. We may find ourselves overwhelmed by the weight of life's challenges, whether it's financial pressure, family difficulties, health problems, or emotional distress. These burdens can feel like an anchor pulling us down into despair, but when we bring these burdens to God, we release them from our own grasp and place them into His capable hands. We may not know how He will work things out or when the resolution will come, but we trust that He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good. Trusting in God's ability to handle our burdens frees us from the constant anxiety and worry that often accompany them. Instead of constantly trying to fix everything ourselves, we are called to rest in the knowledge that God is working on our behalf. Letting go of our burdens requires humility. It means admitting that we cannot do it all on our own. It means recognizing our limitations and acknowledging that we are not meant to carry everything ourselves. We are not meant to be superhuman, we are human and we have limits. God, however, is limitless. His strength is perfect in our weakness, and His power is made perfect when we admit our need for Him. It's easy to want to control everything, especially when we fear the unknown, but in surrender we find peace. When we release our anxieties and struggles to God, we no longer have to carry the burden of figuring everything out on our own. We trust that He will guide us and provide for us in His timing. Surrendering our burdens to God also requires faith. It means trusting that He is faithful to His promises even when we cannot see the outcome. We may not always understand why things happen the way they do, but we can trust that God's plans are always for our good. In Romans 8:28, we are reminded that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This verse is a powerful reminder that God's purposes are far greater than our own understanding. When we give our burdens to Him, we trust that He is working all things together for our good, even when it seems like everything is falling apart. Surrendering to God requires us to let go of our own plans and trust that His plan is better. In moments of struggle, it can be easy to focus on our problems and become consumed by them. We may start to believe that our situation is too big for God to handle, or that He doesn't see or care about what we are going through. But God is always present, always aware of our struggles, and always willing to help us. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus invites us to come to Him when we are weary and burdened, promising that He will give us rest. When we are carrying the weight of our struggles, we can feel burdened and exhausted. But Jesus offers a different way, a way of surrender and rest. He invites us to take His yoke upon us, knowing that His burden is light. This is not a call to do nothing, but a call to surrender our heavy burdens and allow Him to take them on our behalf. Sometimes the hardest part of surrender is learning to let go of our own timeline. We live in a world where everything happens quickly and we are accustomed to having answers and solutions at our fingertips. However, God's timing is not our timing and His ways are not our ways. When we surrender our burdens to Him, we must also trust in His perfect timing. We may not see immediate results and we may not understand why certain things are happening the way they are, but we trust that God is working. Surrendering our burdens means learning to wait patiently for God to move in His own time. It's important to remember that surrendering our burdens doesn't mean we won't face difficulties. Life will still present challenges and we will still experience trials. However, when we surrender to God, we are not facing these difficulties alone. We have the power of the Creator of the universe walking with us through every storm, guiding us and providing for us. This does not mean that our problems will always disappear instantly, but it does mean that we can face them with the strength, wisdom, and peace that only God can provide. When we surrender our burdens to God, we are acknowledging that He is in control and that He will give us what we need to face each day. This surrender is not a one-time event. It is a daily choice to trust Him with everything we carry. As we continue to surrender our burdens to God, we will experience His peace and His strength in greater measure, knowing that He is always with us, always working for our good, and always faithful to carry our burdens for us.